Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to read part of Douglas Jardine's book, The Mad Mullah of Somaliland. And this is a book that was published in early 1920s. Now, Douglas Jardine was a colonial administrator in British Somaliland, and he served in a very top office between 1916 and 1921. And this book is a book that tells the story of Mohammed Abdullah Hassan, and in particular the Dervish wars that he fought with the British from 1899 to around 1920. Now, in this part, I'm going to read, and you're going to see how it's so difficult to get an accurate picture of what was happening during the Dervish Wars, because even the people you would expect to be objective and to cover the conflict in an objective were biased, so biased. And of course, Douglas Jardine himself is obviously was so biased because he was a colonial administrator. And remember, this book is written while the British continued to colonize Somaliland. So he was interested and motivated to present the British as the good guys, number one. Number two, to portray the British activities in Somaliland as justified. So with him, of course, and I've said this so many times, there is no way we can think of him as an objective source. But then there were others who came, and before the third expedition against Muhammad Abdullah Hassan, it is during this time that the Dervish War, became big news in the UK. And in fact, Douglas Jardine does say that around 1902, 1903, there were so many journalists who came from the UK to come and cover the war. And now, of course, the simplistic understanding of journalists is that they are objective. They cover news in a neutral manner, and whatever they tell you is how things are, and it's up to you to interpret them in the way you want. But in reality, no, that's not how it is. Journalists are often so biased, and even especially during wars, journalists are often captured, basically, and I don't mean physically captured, like either they are made to see things in a certain way, or they are picked based on what is thought they believe, or the biases they hold. And it was the same case during the Dervish Wars. Of course, all these journalists come from Britain or the UK to cover the war, but we can say maybe 90% of them already saw the British as the good guys, and Mohammed Abdullah Hassan as the bad guy. And this is a part that I found that come out very, very well, that you get to see actually these journalists who are not reliable. And this is what Douglas Jardine writes: the success of this maneuver. Now here, he's telling us about a battle that went on at a place called Daratole. Now, there's a battle that went on at Daratole, and the British did suffer a lot of losses. It was not a good day for them. And now Douglas Jardine is describing that battle, and he says the success of this maneuver was so striking that several successive charges were made, in which the Daily Graphic correspondent, who had bluntly taken the place of a wounded officer, especially distinguished himself. Now, this is a journalist. This is a journalist who was embedded in the British Army, and he was, of course, the fact that a journalist is embedded into an army in itself is problematic, but that's so common even today, actually, that journalists are embedded in the operations of certain military we can say certain armies when they go into certain operations. That in itself is problematic. And when you see that a journalist is embedded into an operation, you shouldn't take them serious. Like you should consume what they produce with a lot of, you should be very wary of what they produce, because either what they see is very carefully managed, or they themselves are actually part of the army. And so this is the case whereby, in this case, a journalist who worked for the Daily Graphic is embedded in the British Army, and then a soldier is wounded, and he takes up the place of that soldier, meaning he knew how to use weapons. Most likely he was even a soldier himself, but he had been given the responsibility of being like he's the correspondent of Daily Graphic, which means that it was propaganda, basically. So he takes up the position of that soldier, and he fights, and he distinguishes himself, which is very, very, very interesting, because this is a journalist, remember. Yeah, so that tells you that um, information that was collected and given or shared with the British public was already very biased. Whatever they had was what the British Army or the government was ready to have them consume. Anything else that was not good for PR, maybe, or could portray the grievances of Mohammed Abdullah Hassan as legitimate, most likely were not covered. And also maybe the crimes that were committed by the British Army most likely were covered up or could not be talked about. And very terrible things done by the army of Mohammed Abdullah Hassan will, of course, be magnified. That's what happens in wars. Unfortunately, this is something that happened in 1901, 1902, 1903, but it's something that happens in 2025 so many times, more times than we even count. So yeah, so I found that to be very interesting that a correspondent of a major, seems like Daily Graphic was a major newspaper then, would take up the place of a wounded officer and really distinguish himself as Douglas Jardine explains it. Those are my random thoughts.